Hello and welcome to myfinanceteacher.org. Today I want to have a look at crude oil because I think there is an interesting investment opportunity brewing up, and let me tell you why it might be a good idea to start accumulating some position in crude oil. Possibly through a USO, that is an ETF that tracks crude oil price. There are a lot of other vehicles. Viewers might be interested in the vehicle that you are using, so share your recommendations on how do you invest in energy or crude oil specifically in the comments down below. Now, moving on to why I think it might be a good idea to start gradually accumulating some positions in crude oil is because of what the intermediate cycles tell me. If we look at the performance of crude oil from the beginning of 2015 all the way up until now, this is basically what do I see in terms of intermediate cycles in crude oil. We've had 6 cycles between middle of March 2015 and second half of December 2018. That gives us 197 weeks. That gives us around 33 weeks per cycle. Actually, there is an alternative count to these cycles as well. Here's another way of looking at these cycles. That gives us 7 cycles within the same period, and that avoids this kind of unusually long intermediate cycle between the middle of June 2017 and the middle of June 2018. This count for intermediate cycles in crude oil avoids this year-long cycle, but to be honest, I prefer this count with 6 cycles because one of the things I'm looking for in an intermediate cycle low is a low below this 20-week moving average. And we don't have that close below the 20-week moving average in February last year. However, if you divide 197 weeks by 7 intermediate cycles, that gives us around 28 weeks per cycle. In either case, whether you are looking at 6 or 7 intermediate cycles within this period, that gives us 28 to 32 weeks per cycle. And in either case, current cycle being 24 weeks long, still has a few weeks to go to reach a normal duration. Now, looking a little bit closer at the current intermediate cycle that's been going on since December last year, if the current intermediate cycle still has a few weeks to go into the normal duration, it's pretty likely that crude oil is going to break below the recent lows at about $50.70. However, I don't think crude oil is going to drop that much deeper compared to $50. Although crude oil price might be quite volatile, it's already stretched somewhat below all of these moving averages. That's 150 and 200-day moving averages. And looking at Fibonacci retracements for the current intermediate cycle, well, say even 78% retracement is somewhere around $48. So a continued decline towards $48 as we move into the normal duration for the intermediate cycle in crude oil is possible, but I don't think, as I mentioned, crude oil is going to drop out of the bed and give us a lower low compared to what we had in December last year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for another week or 2 or 3 or several weeks, but pretty soon I'm going to accumulate some positions anywhere around $50 and below that. And once crude oil turns around, once we see this intermediate cycle low and an advancing phase starts, even if the rally is not very strong one, I still think crude oil should at least regain this area of all of the moving averages, at least retest that area. That's somewhere around $59 to $60. So even a relatively modest advancing phase of the new intermediate cycle that will probably start in another several weeks, maybe a couple of months, might give us gains somewhere in the range of 17 to 20%, even if that advancing phase turns out to be a very, very modest one. Although I think there is a good chance of crude oil going relatively higher, and instead of retesting this downtrend line that crude oil has been in since second half of last year, within the next intermediate cycle, there is a chance that crude oil retests this other downtrend line that it has been in since the beginning of 2014. So that would give us nicer prices and nicer gains. Prices in the range of upper 60s, probably close to $70 per barrel. That would give us a slightly higher high compared to what we saw in the middle of April this year. And if that were to happen, if crude oil price does really retest that longer-term downtrend line and reaches towards $70, that series of higher highs and higher lows might actually restore some confidence in the crude oil market, which was lost in the end of last year when crude oil price dropped from $77 all the way down to low 40s. So that's my outlook for crude oil. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Consider following me on Twitter. All the links are in the description below. And as always, good luck in your trades.